Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Mike Fitzsimmons. He's the co-founder and CEO of Crosschq. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing at Crosschq is very innovative and cool and very much needed in the space. But before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Yeah, so I actually moved around quite a bit. And I'm not sure that I have grown up yet. Hopefully, but I will tell you,
that is key.
I'm so son of immigrant parents who, when they came to this country, I was the youngest of four.
Wow.
So I was actually born in Nashville, Tennessee, but we moved around quite a bit. So where I landed for the longest period of time was outside of Boston, Massachusetts, in a little town called Concord.
Okay.
And then after that, moved again for high school to Virginia, to Richmond, Virginia. So somewhere between Nashville, Boston, and Richmond is where I would say I grew up.
Very cool. So you went to college. What did you take and why?
So I majored in economics. I went to a small liberal arts college. I actually went there because I was invited to play soccer.
Oh, nice.
And I took economics because at a small liberal arts college, the curriculum is not nearly as diverse as I would have liked. It was the closest thing I could get to a business major.
Okay.
But in retrospect, turned out to be a good move.
Very cool. So you get out of college, walk us through your career and maybe some highlights along the way up until coming up with the idea for Crosschq, and then we'll get into that.
Awesome. Yeah. So I knew very early I was a much better worker than I was a student. And so throughout my college experience, I was always working for sure, whether it was summers, getting internships, as well as even during my kind of holiday breaks. And I worked for a company called Circuit City for all 4 years of my college.
Oh, very cool.
Circuit City was actually headquartered in Richmond, Virginia, and at the time was a super innovative retailer. For many of your audience, they might not even know who this company is, but they were Best Buy before Best Buy existed. So $12 billion company in the consumer electronics retail space, and I got into a really cool group there out of college in their corporate development side of the house. And one of the things that, again, a little known fact about Circuit City, they launched a ton of new companies while running this massive multi-billion-dollar retailer. And one of those that I was very fortunate to work on was CarMax, which many people don't know, but CarMax is now still a very thriving, massive enterprise that people forget was actually started and founded by Circuit City. So it was cool.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, very neat. So I got my initial exposure then to the sort of the traditional big company stuff and learning how to do all that, but then also got exposure to the startup within the big company, which was really where I got my initial chops around how to go, be an entrepreneur and go take a business from kind of cradle to full development.
Interesting. Okay. So how did you come up with the idea for Crosschq, and what exactly is it?
Yeah, and not to bore even further, but just to connect the dots. When I left during the dot-com boom, I was actually recruited to come out to a company in the Bay Area that was in the e-commerce space. I came out to run product for this organization. This company was called Something Now, which we actually sold to CNET.
Nice.
And then after CNET, I started my first company, which was a company called Delivery Agent. And Delivery Agent was a pretty neat idea of enabling consumers to buy products they see while they're watching television shows and movies. So it was, I'm watching Brad Pitt in Ocean's 11 and I wanted sunglasses. How do I make that happen? So had a good run with that organization. I ran that company for about 10 years. We got it to just under 200 million in revenue, and we were actually planning for an IPO. And one of the things that we experienced in that process was some challenges as it relates to making hiring decisions. And my co-founder and I, Pete Gettner, he was an investor and on my board at that time. We both kind of learned from that experience just how tough it is to optimize your hiring decisions, and just how little data there is out in the world to help high growth organizations make the best decisions, both for the organization and for the talent that they're bringing on. So at the end of the day, that was the inspiration for starting Crosschq, was really that real world experience that Pete and I had. And we looked at each other and said, hey, let's go fix this. And so we launched Crosschq in 2000 or started to raise a little capital for Crosschq in 2018, really kind of brought the product to market in kind of mid 2019. And then here we are today with a pretty cool high growth company.
Interesting. Okay. So how did Crosschq launch, and how has it evolved to what it is today?
Yeah. So what was really cool, and from the perspective that we had initially, we said, hey, one of the big gaps in the hiring market is this really getting to know your candidate before you make the hiring decision. And
Totally.
You think about what the currency is that has been used for the last, several decades. It was sort of the resume, which we kind of all know how archaic that is. Then it's LinkedIn, which we also know is kind of an unbalanced view. It's all kind of candidate driven. And then there's our interviews. There's also sort of pockets of different assessment testing and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, when you add it all up, it's clearly not working. 45% of our new hires don't make it 18 months and are deemed to be mishires. And if you just think about that and zoom out for a moment on how impactful that is to organizations and how much it costs them to train, to recruit, et cetera. If you think about the impacts to culture and productivity when you make a mishire, and you then also think about from the talent's perspective and the individual that you hire, just how disruptive it is to their life. It's not good for them either, right? Yeah. So when you put all that together, you realize there's a big problem here. So what we set out to do with Crosschq in the first phase was to kind of reimagine and reinvent the process of doing reference checking. Making that much more human, making that much more balanced and transparent to both candidates and companies, but take it to the cloud, use artificial intelligence, do it in a modern way that's mobile friendly and user friendly, but at the end of the day, helps get better insights to the company to make sure that the hire they're about to make is going to be a long-lasting, thriving employee for their team, right? So that was sort of the phase one product, was this reimagined version of the reference check. We call this the Crosschq 360. We do some unique things with this product, not to bore your audience, but in addition to getting feedback from people you have worked with, your peers, your former managers, your former coworkers, et cetera, we also enable the candidate to give the same feedback on themselves. So when you ultimately look at a Crosschq 360 report, you're going to see, hey, here's how Kevin views himself on these dimensions. And then here's how all these other people that have worked with Kevin view him on these dimensions, and hopefully gives us a really good view on how good a match he's going to be for our organization.
Can I see the other, like the recommendations from, like I say I'm good at X. Can I see what other people say about that, or does that not really work?
So we're working on a version. So it doesn't work because the commitment to the reference giver is anonymity, just to make the whole machine work.
Gotcha.
Now that said, we are working on a version of our report that is much more kind of candidate friendly and really just focus on your strengths and maybe your developmental areas, but can be done in a way that's fully anonymized and can be used, frankly, to be more developmental.
Sure.
So that is something that's on our roadmap. But today we have to protect sort of the confidence of the reference giver, if you will, to make the whole machine work.
No, that makes sense. So walk us through, how does a company actually sign up and use Crosschq?
Yeah, and you had asked a question prior that I didn't fully answer, and I'll do that, and then I'll tell you how they sign up and use us. But you'd asked a question about kind of where we started and what we learned. And one of the things that we learned as we got into this was, gosh, this is an awesome tool, right? This can absolutely help replace, the archaic process of doing a traditional reference check, and it can also just give wonderful new content and insights to these organizations to make better decisions. But one of the things that we learned pretty quickly was this is all well and good, but if you can't measure and analyze this, it's kind of meaningless. And so there's a concept in the talent industry that is talked about for a long, long time called quality of hire. And quality of hire has historically been an arbitrary measurement that people talk about around, gosh, I understand the quantity of my hires and how many people I hired, but do I really know what the quality is of those hires? And this industry has survived somehow without having any sort of real quality measurement, any reliable, consistent quality measurement. And so that was the next big thing we realized that we could go solve for. And we have done just some awesome work on this front, where we are basically in its simplest form connecting all of this pre-hire intelligence we get on a hire with post-hire business outcomes. So it could be as simple as Kevin lasted here for 9 months and he was a top performer, and he was a culture ad based on whatever kind of analytics we're getting, but putting all that together so you can actually start to understand your quality of hire based upon, the source of the hire. Who was the recruiter on the hire? Who was the hiring manager? We're now doing this from a diversity perspective on age, ethnicity, and gender. I mean, we believe that quality is colorblind, but we also believe that the world still needs to maybe prove that through data, right? So this idea of also now being able to measure quality of hire in a reliable and consistent, with a reliable and consistent methodology and tool is a big part of where we're going. And if you think about the closed loop nature of all of this, it's like, hey, once you understand who's going to be a quality hire in your org, your ability to better, use like the Crosschq 360 product up front to, better vet and match, the whole thing should help us all just build better companies and create better opportunities for talent, is our kind of big picture.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the one thing that seems to be a real transition coming out of the pandemic is, I think it's really made, employers, but I think more so employees really rethink what's valuable to them. And what I mean by that is some people love going to the office 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, or whatever that means. Some people want to go in 2-3 days a week. Some people want to be 100% remote or maybe just come in on a random Friday or something. So I think having a data now to actually manage this new kind of world of coming into the office, not coming to the office, having a remote team, not having a remote team, and kind of everywhere in between, I think having the data behind this is going to be super important and only get more valuable going forward. What are your thoughts around that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful, controversial, complicated topic, right? And I think that it was interesting sort of how Google addressed the return to work piece of saying, hey, last year was an emergency, so we reacted to the emergency.
Yeah, fair.
Right?
Yeah.
The emergency's over. So, right, things are going to start to normalize. And I know I'm sort of summarizing that in probably too high a level, but look, I think it's complicated, and I think you have absolutely right now. You probably saw the same data in terms of last month, or I think in April, we had the highest quit rate in the last 2 decades in this country, right? I think it was 2.7% of people actually quit their jobs. The pendulum has shifted so far to the talent. Talent is in control. We've never seen anything like it, right? And this talent market is unprecedented, and it is a different game. So you get these two things happening where organizations are forced to deal with that reality because they want to acquire and retain the best talent, and people have made decisions for their own lives, right? And adopted during this emergency. And so how do you kind of get that all navigated and figured out, and what policies do you put in place? I mean, even in our backyard here, you see what sort of big companies like Salesforce or Spotify or some of these folks are doing. And then you see guys in kind of the middle of the road policies of 3 days a week coming back, it is the range is just so massive. So I do believe that that is complicated, and we could talk for hours just on that topic alone. all that said, though, I think that this quality of hire piece and quality, at the end of the day, we have to be achieving business outcomes, right?
Sure.
And the second we take our eye off of that ball, these things don't work. And this will come back on the other side. That it will get tighter. The market will slow down. It will cool off. You're seeing a little bit of it now. That is going to happen. And when that happens, we believe that this notion of quality is going to be even more important to measure. So put yourself in the shoes of we're a year from now, and we're trying to understand, okay, we have this remote workforce, and maybe 70% of our organization hasn't come back to the office, but now we're trying to understand how that's impacting performance and business outcomes. I think it's going to be fascinating to watch, right? And I think it's,
Totally.
I don't think we know, I'll tell you, like, as a specific vertical, if you think about customer service and folks that are in the call center business, well, now that they're working from home, and that's an industry that has incredibly high turnover, you know what? That might actually work long term, right? To keep them working from home. It's just a better quality of life. You can, it all might just work better. Well, that might be very different for, someone who's just out of college, starting their first career as a, outbound sales rep for a software company. Well, they need to be in the office. They need to be, mentored. They need to be with folks and all that good stuff. So there's all these different nuances that are going to be fascinating to watch unfold. And I don't think any of us know the answers. We're all going to do our level best and do what's best for our organizations. But at the end of the day, it all has to map back to the business outcomes, right, for this to work. And the second those things start slipping, I think you're going to see companies reacting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the thing that's interesting to me about the whole kind of shift is, I think in a lot of cases for certain industries, things were very broken. And I think the pandemic pushed it to one extreme. And I'm very curious to see how much kind of comes back, because I think in certain cases, certain types of employees will do better remote, some will not, some need a hybrid thing. And so being able to have the data to figure out what types of person that candidate is, and the job role that you're kind of expected of them, whether they can be in the office 5 days a week or 3 days a week or 100% remote or some combination of all those things, is actually going to be really powerful, right?
I believe so. It's really interesting too. I think about, we have a gentleman on our board, our advisory board, named Brooks Holtum, and he's a PhD, one of the top thinkers around the whole concept of retention and of employee retention. And it was so interesting. I remember that one of the first conversations I had with him, because he has studied this thing to no end. And he said, one of the one highest predictors of retention is, we know the obvious ones, like your relationship with your manager and your compensation. But in that top 5 list is how long your commute is, right?
Yeah.
And I actually, when I think about so much of these conversations and the real energy around, I'll tell you, I'm seeing this already with companies that have announced 3 days back to work, and they all seem to be selecting the second week in September as the date to come back.
Fair enough.
But the lashback, the real lashback, is people think, I'm not commuting for 2 hours and burning my productivity, right? Yeah. And it's the same concept, frankly, that was driving attrition before the pandemic as this now, right? It's not a new idea.
Interesting.
Commuting is terrible, right? So there is also, I think some of this is like not that new. It's the same fundamental ideas, and that's different from people that have said, "Hey, I've picked up and moved to, XYZ town that I'm no longer, I'm 1,000 miles now from the headquarters in Chicago." Right? Yeah. That's a different concept, a different discussion. But it is interesting how much this stuff kind of comes back to some simple, fundamental human things.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into actually using the product. And you quickly covered it, but I want to spend a bit more time on that. So how exactly does it work? So walk me through, I write a job posting and I post it online and I start recruiting candidates. That's basically where you start, correct? Or walk us through where in the job hiring process Crosschq starts.
Yeah, it really is a function of where the organization wants to insert us. So hiring workflows vary based upon different organizations. And so we have, and at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do is just give you additional insights into this candidate to help you make sure you're making the right decision, right, for you and for them. So that can start very early. We have some organizations that start the Crosschq process, post your application, maybe post your first phone screen, but pre your first interview, because it can make interviews that much more impactful. I.e., if I know this about Kevin in advance of the interview, I can go deeper on the things that I want to go deeper on. And I know you don't need to waste my time on some of the other stuff because I feel pretty good about the insights I've gotten. So it can be used as early as that. It can also be used as a confirmatory tool. Some companies use it post-offer, right, where it's confirmatory, just to make sure that, there's nothing that they really missed in their process. The sweet spot for the tool seems to be, frankly, right in the middle. It's like, I've taken you enough down this path. There's mutual interest. We like you, but we really want to, expand the scope of our intelligence to make sure we can inform sort of our final interviews. And then really that seems to be the workflow stage. So the actual sort of tactical piece of how it happens, we integrate with most of the top what are called applicant tracking systems. These are systems like Workday, and there's a whole bunch of others, but these are the sort of systems that organizations use to manage that workflow in terms of how Kevin progresses through from the point he applies to when we hire him. And literally in that process, the user, which would be a recruiter or an HR person, it's a press of a button that says, hey, launch the Crosschq for Kevin. Kevin gets an invitation into Crosschq, so Kevin's the candidate. Kevin gets the invitation into Crosschq. He completes a 6-minute survey on himself, and then he uploads the contact information for the people, his former coworkers, former managers, peers, whatever it might be. And ultimately, that's what gets the whole ball rolling. Those people, let's just say that Mike was Kevin's manager. I then get an invitation into Crosschq. I also complete a 6-minute survey. 70% of those are done on a mobile device. And basically within 48 hours, I get sort of this consolidated report from all these folks that know Kevin, combined with Kevin's insights on himself. And that arrives in my inbox. It gives me now this sort of new complementary source of content to help me make my hiring decision.
Interesting. Okay. And then, I can just go from there. No, that makes a lot of sense. The thing I'm curious about then is, how does it, like, say you hire me, for example, you covered it quickly, but I want to dive deeper into, how does it know whether I'm adding value to the company, where I'm a terrible employee, or kind of everywhere in between?
Yeah. So the it of it, I would say, in terms of how does it know? I mean, it's all data, right? And it's all, you would think this isn't that complex, because companies do things like performance reviews, and companies have their own HR systems that help them track how long did you last. But no one's put all that together. And although this might seem extraordinarily complex, it's really a function of connecting all that pre-hire data that we had on Kevin with now post-hire data, which could be as simple as, did he last? Did he make it 90 days? Did he make it 180 days? Right? It could be performance. Like, what was his performance review? Companies are getting, we have a pulse survey that we send out every 30 days to your manager and to you as the employee. That basically, it's like, hey, Kevin, how's your experience at the new company? And to your manager, it says, how is Kevin performing? Because we really want to detect early in that life cycle, is he going to be a quality hire? And if so, we need to make sure we're investing in him properly. Or if there's it doesn't seem to be working out, we got to do something about it, right? Like, quickly, right? And we gotta either, it might be just a relationship with his manager. It might not have been the right job match, all that good stuff. So that's how we're doing. It's data. It's connecting all that pre-hire data with whatever post-hire data we can get our hands on. I'll tell you one other dimension that, hey, you might not be performing great in the role that you're in right now, but from a culture perspective, you're highly engaged and you're a culture add to our organization. So we also capture that. So that tells us, hey, no, Kevin's someone we want to retain, but he's not doing great in his current job. So maybe we got him in the wrong role, right? So
Interesting.
Let's act on that, because he's a keeper, right?
Sure.
Or if you weren't let's just go to the other extreme where we're 2 months in and you've skipped 3 meetings. You're not following up on anything. And we're pretty clear that this is not going to work out, right?
Yeah.
We have to be aware of that too, to start succession planning or whatever else we got to do. So the bottom line is getting all of that into a single source of truth. So you have this, quality of hire measurement and analytical tool that will help influence whatever business decisions you want to go make. I think that's all a big part of it.
No, that makes a lot of sense. So then how does it work though? I've been using Crosschq for 6 months, 9 months, 2 years, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Does it start building profiles around, oh, we have this new candidate, compared to our past hires, this person's awesome, somewhere in the middle, maybe not a good fit for us? Like, does it automatically kind of create profiles around types of people, or how does that work or not work?
Yeah, there's certainly a world where, the notion of kind of high performing personas can be defined. And then that could help influence how you're building your team. That gets delicate, especially in a world where we want to drive, we don't want everybody to look alike, right? And we don't want to, we want to drive diversity as a driver of quality, actually, right?
Totally.
But I'll give you some macro outputs of data that we've gotten that I think will just be thought provoking. So we have a high growth customer that is, a unicorn, multi-billion-dollar valuation. They've actually been remote from day one. And I think they're, a couple thousand employees. One of the things they learned from a quality of hire analysis is that new hires for them that are sort of seeking a community experience at their company. Yeah. They're looking for barbecues and beers with their coworkers and they're looking for that kind of thing. Don't do well and don't last because they're fully remote. And so for them, the shift is they're actually looking for things like, are you embedded in your community? Right? You're a little further along in your career where you really just want to show up and do your job. Right. And that's okay for them to acknowledge that and then to be probing for that in the recruiting process, because that's what's going to help you be quality for them.
Totally.
Right. And that just might be very different for a different organization. Like, if you've been to Google's campus, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
It's a party. It's a party there. Right?
Yep.
So anyway, it's just, and those just seem sort of very, so I get a little sensitive on the real sort of lookalike persona matching thing because there's some trap there, but for sure, we're trying to get to themes and trying to get to, stuff that will help us just, build better teams and for both sides of the equation, for talent and for companies.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And you're right. You want to get the most perspectives on the problems and the challenges that you're trying to solve, right? And if you hire the same type of person constantly, I actually think it's not impossible, but it's very hard to think outside how those people think, right? And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just that's kind of the reality of things, right?
Yeah, it's the reality of things, and I do think that so much of this stuff is there's so many cool things once you get data, right? Questions you can ask of data, but just keeping it up at the top. It's like, I'll give you another real world example of where quality of hire and understanding for your org. People think that, and this gets to your question, people think that their own internal referral networks, right, are really great because they're actually a great and efficient way to get talent into your org. Well, guess what? The data says for many organizations, they're actually your lower quality hires.
So why is that, out of curiosity?
Well, it depends on what think about the incentive structure that the organization might have.
Fair
and
enough.
It's like, look, if I'm making $20,000 to refer an engineer into the company, right, as an internal referral bonus,
100%.
who knows, right?
Yeah.
But what's as important is just to be able to say, that's interesting. Why is that, right? And understand, are we, or maybe part of that might be that we're overly relying on the internal employee that gave that reference, and we don't really have a proxy for what's the performance of that internal employee that referred the person. So there's just the bottom line is there's all kinds of stuff, but until we get these questions, like even until we get the data in front of us, we can't even ask the questions, right?
No,
and it's amazing.
No, that it's interesting because the other thing I've been reading too about just in the news is certain industries are having a real hard time recruiting people for a number of reasons. And then I've also heard people in the same industries that are having a hard time. It's like, well, you're clearly doing something wrong if you can't recruit people, right? And I get it's not as black and white as that. It's some are kind of in the gray area with that. But the thing that I find really fascinating about what you guys are doing is I know you can skew data how you kind of want it, but you need data to make decisions around some of these things. Because especially if you have a board of people, obviously you're going to have people that think one way and another way and kind of a bunch of people in the middle, but being able to present them data saying, you know what, like to your point a few minutes ago, if internal referrals from friends or past colleagues is not the best way for us to hire, it's a hell of a lot easier to show people the data that this hasn't been working for us over the last few months or 2 years or whatever. And we actually need to go try to find new people that our internal team don't know, right? And so it is fascinating. You can get rid of a lot of those arguments and kind of assumptions when you have the data to back up what you're trying to say, correct?
Yeah, I think so. And at the end of the day, I always use this simple analogy just in terms of my own company around.
Sure.
Look, you've got limited calories in a day. We're all trying to do our job, right? And so we're going to burn calories, and we want to just burn our calories in the right places, right?
Sure.
And so any way we can do that, I think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day is optimizing this stuff. I'll give you another one because it's topical too. Just another data insight that is might trigger some dialogue. But another great output of this sort of quality of hire analytics, we have a client who was doing a good job of their diverse hiring initiatives and getting there, but they couldn't keep their hires from underrepresented groups. And it wasn't until it was literally like you could map the inflection point. And a big part of this was an inclusion conversation. It was, I show up at a company and I might be from an underrepresented group, but there's no one else in this company that looks like me or feels like me. And so I just don't feel comfortable here. Right. And they turn over quickly. And it wasn't until they increased their total pool did they start to see those retention metrics and those quality metrics start to go the right direction. So it's very much to that point too. It's a chicken and egg, but you're like, hey, until I know that and I can see that and I can understand, okay, I just got to keep grinding here, right, in order to get, to solve this issue. So there's some just neat stuff there around, broadly speaking, around some of inclusion efforts and sort of diverse hiring initiatives that are taking place as well. Where again, data can help because we have bias. And how do you get rid of bias? Is you incorporate data, into our decision making. So there's some neat stuff in there.
Sure. So what's kind of an ideal company size to start using Crosschq?
Well, the cool thing is, the neat thing is, we have, the most valuable company created in the last decade with Snowflake, right? Which is, just a Rocketship tech company. And we have the largest in the agricultural industry, the largest Kiwi company in the world running on our platform, believe it or not. So look, anybody who's building, teams and wants to optimize their output is an opportunity for us. We have a SMB package for true startups and for smaller companies, just to let them get going. And we have enterprise customers that are, tens of thousands of employees running on the platform. And I think we're really purpose driven in all of this. We want to solve the problem for everybody, for the company and for the individual. So, there really isn't a limit to where and who we can be helpful to. All that being said, our kind of sweet spot at the moment is, call it 500 to 10,000 employees. It's kind of that middle market. When you get into these larger enterprises, they're just more complex, the big ones. Yeah. And from a small startup like ours, the sales cycles are really long and the decision making is complex, and you can imagine. Yep. So I think that's where we're really having a really good adoption and quick adoption is in that kind of mid-market currently.
Sure. So you've obviously done a bunch of stuff before Crosschq. Is there any advice or things you've learned along the way being an entrepreneur that you maybe wish you knew kind of earlier on in your career that you do now, or is there some things that you used to do that you don't anymore, wish you stopped doing over the years?
Yeah, there's a couple of big ones, and I'll say first of all that I know this is cliche and we hear it. It's not fun.
Yeah,
right?
fair. Yep.
Like just be honest with yourself on that, right? And it's not, and trusted data around startups, they take 7 to 10 years to mature, right?
Yep.
So that is just the reality, right? Full stop. And so certainly there are fun parts of it, and there's the highs are high, but the lows are really low, and there's a lot of lows, right? And so you have to just make sure you're wired for it. I really do believe that.
Interesting.
And accept the challenge, wholeheartedly accept the challenge. I think the other piece that for me are kind of my guiding principles, and I also am a partner in a venture fund, so I do a fair amount of investing as well. But there's two really simple things. I say team and TAM, and I say it over and over and over again.
Okay.
And I think that the right team, right, and a big enough addressable market, you got a shot. If the addressable market's just not big enough, no matter winning, what's the prize if you win? For something that's really, really hard. And the part, though, to answer your question, that I've probably matured most on is the team part. I think earlier in my career, I just probably felt like I could find a way through, and I just probably put too much on myself and didn't trust enough. I think that was probably a blind spot for me. And as I got to be a better leader, was to really, really, really prioritize the team.
Interesting.
And trust the team and acknowledge you're not getting there without a winning team. You're just not. It's not going to happen. So
100%.
those are my two big ones. Is that kind of team and TAM, and that's the piece that I think I've grown the most on, is understanding the team component of it and how to both recruit and retain, and also set the team up for success.
How did you learn to let go of some of that, though? Because I would put myself in that boat. Sometimes it's like, I'll just handle it. And then I'm like, no. I gotta pass this off to somebody because it's not worth my time or effort, or I just need to delegate. Like, how did you actually get over that and realize that and start doing it?
It's so hard, right? It's so hard. And
mm-hmm.
part of why it's hard too for entrepreneurs is they actually got there by being the doer.
Totally.
Right? Part of what got you so great is because you're like, I see a problem, I fix it. I see a problem, I fix it. Right. And I think I'm capable of fixing any problem, So it's really hard. It's a very human, hard thing. And I know you as an entrepreneur as well, you obviously live it too. It's just a hard thing. And so it is just awareness that for me, and I have to literally still consciously do that, and consciously stand down and bite my lip and just say, hey, this is okay. Right. This is okay. And then we're adding a whole bunch of new hires to our team, and it's a younger generation of leaders, and I'm excited to see them grow and become the next generation of leaders. But it was, I not for the faint of heart, but Pete and I both, we're kind of older entrepreneurs in the grand scheme of things.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
We're not
post 25.
Post 25, man. We're like, we're old. And so, and that is a big thing. And I think so part of the mental shift for me on that is also prioritizing developing these young up and coming leaders in our organization, right? And thinking about that as the output. Let's get them great, right? Like let's focus on getting them great, and not focus on and maybe that takes a little bit longer to solve the issue or whatever that might be. So I think, but it's not easy. I love the question, and I know you can relate. So it's a real human conversation and a blind spot for a lot of entrepreneurs. I know that for sure.
Yeah, I know it's interesting because my last couple things I've been working on, well, this was a couple years ago, but at the time, the last couple things I'd been working on was I was brought in to kind of come in and clean up the interface on an app that was been around for a couple of years. And they kind of had a designer kind of come in and out. So it was just kind of a mess because they never really had somebody doing it. And one of my good buddies, known him forever, was basically like, how does it feel to be the old guy to come in and clean up all the young guys kind of stuff? And I just kind of was like, yeah, it's just interesting, right? Just that shift, then when you notice that, you're like, yeah, I'm at least a decade older than everybody here now. It's kind of an interesting, it's an interesting thing, but, and I don't know, like I'm fine with it. But it's interesting, right? And it was one of the first times I really noticed that. The other thing that I want your thoughts on, that you mentioned, your first piece of advice, how did you not give up and get through the low points? Because I always joke with people, it's like literally doing a startup is the best and worst thing I've ever done. And I will give you one of those answers based on the 15-minute interval that I'm in on that when you ask me, right? And so how have you kind of stuck through it and rode through this stuff? Because some days you're just like, you know what, I need to quit doing this. This is stupid. I have a family and whatever, blah, blah, blah. There's a number of reasons. Like, how have you gotten through and persevered for so long?
Yeah, I think I think the first, my first true one that I started, and that was a decade-long journey. That was just pure determination. I saw no other option, right? I just saw no other. I was literally, it was just that. It was just grit, don't quit, right? And I was probably so young or younger at that stage where I didn't even know enough to know that maybe I should have maybe gone a different direction early. I just didn't know. I didn't see that sign. So I don't even know tactically how I did it. And I don't think it was a very healthy part of my life, to be honest with you, just in terms of, you know, the mentality of it. I think coming to this situation was just signal detection. Early signal detection is so critical, right? And this is part of your question about sort of advice to entrepreneurs or what have you. That thing of fail fast is so critical. And I was not good at it earlier and really good at it now. It's like when you have early signal detection, stop doubling down on things that you don't have positive signal on, and make sure you find the things that you do have positive signal down on and triple down and quadruple down. And I think that is a really important way to keep you from getting to have the holes getting too deep. Because when the holes get too deep, or when you're tripling down on something that isn't working, right?
100%. Yeah.
If you move quick and find the things that are working, those lows just get less low. And I think that is it might seem subtle, but I think that is part of where your mental health also isn't taking a 24/7 beating, because you're smart enough to identify the things that you shouldn't be doing, and again, focusing on the things that you should be doing. So I don't have any great secrets on it, right? It's hard,
fair.
Right?
Yeah, 100%.
But that's probably the piece that was most helpful for me.
No, I think that's actually really good advice. And one thing that I've been using lately to fail fast and get feedback on as quick as possible is I've been using a no-code solution to build a quick version 1. Just get feedback from peers and people that I know, whether this is a good idea or not, and then kill it off. Or it's like I've even built like a simple like WordPress thing, you know, for a few evenings or a few weekends, and say like, I'm building this. What do you think? Right. And so for me, it's like, if you can spend a few evenings or a couple weekends or a few weeks or maybe a couple of months to build something, start getting feedback from real people without spending a ton of time and money. That's really been working for me lately. And what I find about that is, like, if I spend 2 evenings or 2 weeks or even a month or 2 on something, and it's a bad idea and people say like, nah, I'm not going to use this. Well, I'm out a bunch of time and maybe like a couple $100, right? At the most. Where if you spend 6 months, 9 months, you build this thing, you try to raise a little bit of money, and somebody tells you it sucks, well, that's way more crushing than, you know, and so that's just something that I've been doing lately, and it seems to be working. I might change and iterate on that, but it's interesting. I think there's been so much focus in the past that you need to have this perfect version 1 all the time. And I don't really believe that. I think in some ways, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is sometimes your early adopters that struggle through your beta version end up being some of your best customers because they felt like they built the product with you. Have you found that either building CrossFit or Crosschq, sorry, and some of the other projects you've been involved in or invested in?
Yeah, there's a wonderful loyalty thing that happens, right? And they're human, right?
Yep.
Just be real about it. And you had to, in the early stages, for you to get those beta customers, you obviously had to build a relationship, and they had to have faith in you, right? You didn't meet them on the side of on the street and that sort of thing. So there's just a great human thing about that, and they're cheering for you, and they were like, they feel validated, frankly, because they're like, yeah, I gave him a shot, and yeah, he was right, and that means I was kind of right,
Totally.
So it's a weird closed loop circle where there's a healthy thing. I mean, hacks that we have done for sure, and I don't know if you've done a lot of this, but the advisor thing, right? It's just such a good one, right? Just getting advisors that are influencers that can also help you with architecting your product, but also getting you to market. They'll be your beta customers, that kind of thing. That's an awesome way, right? That we for sure did here. But the macro theme of what you mentioned too, is just so cool. I mean, this is a thing for entrepreneurs. They can do just what you said. You can actually, you can do that. You can get a sort of a MVP-ish to market and in a beta test in months, not years, right? And for, like you said, hundreds or thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars. And that's like a phenomenon that's really cool, right? And something that does enable, I think, entrepreneurs to kind of be inventing some neat stuff, right? Quickly.
100%. The other thing I find interesting that took me a long time to realize, and I'm curious if you agree with this or not, or have found this, is if I build something, even if it's crappy and it's the first version and it's really buggy, if you're solving even a little bit of a problem for your early users, well, that was a problem until they started using your product. And sure, your product might not be great or where it needs to be, but if you start slowly solving a part of a problem and you keep solving more and more of that problem, they will be your customer potentially for life, right? Where it doesn't have to solve their entire problem day one, but if you start picking away at that problem or a bunch of problems, then you actually are building something very valuable to them. And it took me a long time to realize that I don't have to solve the entire problem out of the gate, I guess is what I'm getting at. Have you found that, or your thoughts around that?
Yeah, for sure. And look, real world example of how I kind of took you through the initial phases of the Crosschq journey.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier this team and TAM concept. The TAM concept for me on this was like, oh my God, it's not just me. 45% of new hires don't work out.
Yeah.
And the costs of a new hire, everybody has their own number, but this is $100 billion problem, right? So I knew at a macro level that, gosh, if I move the needle on this by 1 or 2 or 3%, I've got a big company here, right? Totally. So that was the TAM part of it. And so to your point, our go-to-market was with this Crosschq 360 product, which was reinventing the reference check. I don't think reinventing the reference check is going to solve the $100 billion problem. It's the first step to doing that. And just like, so what did we do next? Well, next we went and reinvented how they measure quality of hire. So now we have this analytics module that we're selling. And what are we doing next? Well, now we have a sourcing module where they can go identify talent that's going to be a high performer in their organization, right? What are we doing next? Totally. Now we're rolling out an onboarding product that enables new hires to be better onboarded into their new organizations by using much more human insights and get people to know them quickly, which you can imagine in a remote work environment is highly, highly impactful. The bottom line is, at the end of the day, if we do all of these things, which are going to be a lot more complex and a lot more work and a lot more modules in our platform than just a reference checking product, but they're all pointed towards solving that big problem. And the only way you get the right to do that is because you solved an initial problem. And because we successfully solved the initial problem on the reference checking thing, now they trust us to go solve these other problems. So I think that big or small, that's how it goes, right? Yeah. That is just how the world of a startup goes, and that's how you evolve. So I'm a massive believer in what you said. I think that's exactly how you grow these businesses and how you need to grow these businesses.
No, perfect. But sadly, we're out of time. So how about we close with mentioning where people can get more information about Crosschq and anything else you want to mention?
Yeah, for sure. And I appreciate that. And you can certainly check us out at www.crosschq.com, but it's Crosschq with a Q. So it's CROSSCHQ.com, or check this out on LinkedIn or any of the other wonderful social channels that we leverage. But for sure, just come to the website, or you can email me directly if you want to. I actually go by Fitz, F-I-T-Z, at crosschq.com from an email perspective. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody in your audience, whether it's related to what we do or their own entrepreneurial efforts or anything else they want to talk about, or sports. So,
perfect.
But I certainly appreciate the time and appreciate you having us today.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. And I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
All right. Talk to you.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horek. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.